There is a moment almost everyone knows. The day is over. The tasks are resolved, or at least paused. The body is lying down. The environment is dark. And then, the mind begins, not with important thoughts, not with problems that need solving right now, with fragments, conversations that happened days ago, situations that may or may not happen, things you said and that you perhaps should have said differently, things someone said that still have no satisfying answer, worries that in the daylight felt small, and that in the dark take on a different weight. And the most unsettling part is not the content, it is the timing. Why exactly now? Why is the moment the world finally went quiet? The moment the mind chooses not to go quiet? This is not a coincidence. It is not a lack of mental discipline. It is not something that resolves itself with the decision to stop thinking. It is a mechanism with a very specific internal logic. And when that logic is understood, the night stops being a battlefield between you and your thoughts and begins to reveal what the nervous system is actually trying to do. There is something about how the brain functions that most people don't know, and that completely transforms the way of understanding what happens when you lie down and cannot switch off. The brain does not have a standby mode. There is no state where it simply stops processing and waits for the next stimulus. What exists is an alternative mode of processing, a mode that activates exactly when external demands decrease. You have heard about this before in this series, the default mode network. But what most people don't understand about this network is that it is not neutral. It does not process randomly. It processes what the system considers relevant and unresolved. And relevant, for a nervous system that learned to prioritize threats, means exactly the kind of content that surfaces when you lie down. Incomplete situations, ambiguous interactions, uncertainties about the future, negative possibilities that have not yet been ruled out. The default mode network is not disturbing your rest by accident. It is doing what it was built to do, processing what was left pending, evaluating what still has no resolution, building models of what might happen. The problem is not the function. The problem is the content the system considers a priority for that processing, and that content is determined by the calibration state of the nervous system. A system calibrated for threat will process threats, even when it is at rest, especially when it is at rest. But there is something beyond the default mode network that explains why nighttime specifically is the most intense moment, something that involves the biochemistry of your body in a 24-hour rhythm. There is a hormone most people associate only with acute stress: cortisol. But cortisol is not only a stress response, it has its own circadian rhythm, a pattern of variation across the day that is a fundamental part of the organism's architecture. Under normal conditions, cortisol levels peak in the morning. That morning peak is what wakes the system, what creates the feeling of alertness upon waking, what mobilizes the resources needed for the day. Throughout the day, levels gradually decrease, reaching their lowest values by nighttime. That nocturnal decline is part of the signal the organism uses to initiate the transition into sleep. But here is something that completely reframes this picture. In people with a chronically activated nervous system, that circadian cortisol pattern becomes distorted. Nighttime levels do not fall in the expected way, or they fall and rise again in response to stimuli the system interprets as relevant. The organism enters the night with a hormonal load that does not correspond to a state of rest, and the nervous system, receiving those biochemical signals, interprets the night not as a period of recovery, but as a period of greater vulnerability that demands greater vigilance. It is exactly the opposite of what rest requires, and it is the beginning of a cycle that sustains itself. The night activates vigilance. Vigilance prevents rest. Lack of rest elevates cortisol. Elevated cortisol intensifies vigilance, and the mind, instead of resting, keeps processing, keeps evaluating, keeps doing what the system learned needs to be done when the alert level is high. But this is only the beginning of what is happening, because beyond cortisol and the default mode network, there is something even more specific operating at the level of sleep architecture, something most people have never heard named: And that explains why the quality of nighttime rest can be compromised even when you finally manage to fall asleep. Sleep is not a uniform state. Most people know that. But what most people don't know is that different phases of sleep have radically distinct functions, and that the nervous system in a state of chronic vigilance does not move through those phases the same way a regulated system does. There are two broad categories of sleep that alternate throughout the night in cycles of approximately 90 minutes: slow-wave sleep and REM sleep. Slow-wave sleep, characterized by low-frequency, high-amplitude delta brainwaves, is the sleep of physical recovery and declarative memory consolidation. It is when the brain literally clears metabolic waste accumulated during the day through a system called the glymphatic system. It is when the organism carries out cellular repair, when the immune system strengthens, when blood pressure drops and the heart recovers. REM sleep, characterized by intense brain activity, rapid eye movements, and temporary muscle paralysis, is the sleep of emotional processing and procedural memory consolidation. It is during REM that the brain processes the emotional experiences of the day, integrates new information with what already exists, and in a fascinating way, temporarily disconnects the stress response systems. It creates a context where emotionally charged memories can be reprocessed without the activation of the alarm system. This is more important than it sounds. REM sleep is not just memory and dreams. It is the deepest emotional regulation function the organism possesses. It is when the nervous system literally processes what was difficult, without the cost of the activation that processing would cause during waking hours. And here is where everything connects in an unsettling way. In people with chronically hyperactivated nervous systems, REM sleep is the first to become compromised, not sleep itself. The specific phase that serves as an emotional regulator. This happens for a very precise reason: norepinephrine, the neurotransmitter produced by the locus coeruleus that keeps the system in a state of vigilance, needs to reach very low levels for REM sleep to consolidate adequately. It is as if REM sleep requires the sentinel to rest completely, for the monitoring system to be placed in deep standby. And when the locus coeruleus remains active, when norepinephrine levels do not drop enough, REM sleep fragments becomes shallow. The emotional processing that should happen during the night does not complete, and the accumulation of unprocessed emotional content carries over to the next day, where it adds to whatever the new day brings, where it raises the sensitivity of the threat system even further, where it makes the next night potentially harder than the one before. And the cycle continues. But there is still a layer that deepens what is happening specifically at the moment the mind refuses silence, something that involves not only the state of the nervous system, but the nature of the processing the brain is conducting at that moment. When the nervous system is on alert and the external environment goes quiet, there is a convergence of two processes that amplify each other. The first is nocturnal parasympathetic suppression. The vagus nerve, which under normal conditions initiates the transition into rest as the night advances, encounters resistance. The sympathetic system, which should gradually cede space, maintains its presence. The result is an organism that is physically lying down but physiologically still in a state of readiness. The heart does not slow at the expected rate. Breathing remains slightly faster. Musculature holds a residual tension, and the nervous system, receiving those bodily signals of activation, interprets them as evidence that something requires attention. The second process is nocturnal interoceptive amplification. As external stimuli decrease, internal perception increases. Bodily sensations, those same activation sensations the system is already producing, become more salient, more noticeable, more charged with meaning. A heart beating slightly faster than it should at night becomes a warning signal. A muscle tension that during the day would go unnoticed becomes a presence at night. And the nervous system, already in a state of vigilance, interprets these amplified sensations as confirmation that there is something to be monitored, which creates more activation, which creates more sensations, which creates more interpretation, and the mind that should have been preparing to switch off enters a cycle of processing that feeds on itself. Think about what this means for someone who is simply trying to sleep. Every attempt to force mental silence generates more activation. Every monitoring of one's own sleep state creates more alerts. Every frustration with the inability to switch off adds new emotional content for the system to process. And the night that should have been recovery becomes the context where the system's patterns reveal themselves most clearly, where what was in the background during the day occupies the center, where what movement managed to keep at a distance finally arrives. And there is something in this process that goes far beyond difficulty sleeping, something that reveals what the system is actually trying to do during the night, and that completely changes the relationship with this state. There is a function the nervous system tries to fulfill at night that is rarely recognized as such. It is not random processing. It is not purposeless mental noise. It is consolidation. The system is trying to organize what was left incomplete, to resolve what was not resolved, to integrate what was experienced but not fully processed. Under conditions of healthy sleep, this work happens in a way that does not interfere with consciousness. It happens in the depths of REM sleep, in the slow waves that consolidate memories without demanding conscious attention. But when the nervous system is in a state of elevated alert, when REM sleep is fragmented, when slow waves do not deepen enough, this consolidation work tries to happen at the surface, at the edge of consciousness, where you can hear it, where it appears as nighttime thoughts, as the mind that won't stop, as processing that invades what should have been silence. There is a concept in the neuroscience of sleep that deepens this. It is called offline memory reactivation. During sleep, the hippocampus, the brain structure central to memory formation, reactivates representations of experiences that occurred during waking hours. This process serves to transfer information from short-term memory to long-term storage structures, to integrate new experiences with existing knowledge, to identify patterns, and to do something especially relevant to what we are exploring, to process the emotional content associated with those experiences, gradually modifying the emotional weight of memories over time. This is how difficult events lose their intensity as years pass, not through forgetting, through repeated nocturnal reprocessing that gradually reduces the emotional charge associated with them. But when sleep is compromised, when cycles do not complete adequately, that reprocessing does not happen fully. Emotionally charged memories maintain their intensity. The system keeps trying to process them, but without the adequate biochemical context to do so in a deep and non-conscious way. It tries to do so at the surface, and what you experience as intrusive thoughts at night, as the mind that returns repeatedly to the same themes, is frequently that incomplete processing trying to complete itself. It is the system doing the best it can with the resources it has available. This profoundly changes the way of relating to those thoughts. They are not intruders. They are attempts at healing that are happening in the only available context. But there is something even more specific that explains why certain themes return with such persistence. There is a category of content the system processes with absolute priority. It is called unresolved threat content. Situations the system evaluated as potentially dangerous, but that still have no clear resolution. Ambiguous social interactions whose outcome is still uncertain. Decisions with unforeseeable consequences. Conflicts that were not fully resolved. Uncertainties about the future that the system was unable to classify as safe. For a nervous system calibrated for threat detection, this content has maximum processing priority because, from an evolutionary standpoint, an unresolved threat is a continuous threat, and continuous threats demand continuous attention, even during what should be rest, even when nothing can be done about it at that moment. Even when the situation is objectively unsolvable at 3 a.m, the system is not evaluating whether it is efficient to think about this now. It is following the protocol it learned. Unresolved threats receive attention until they are resolved. And when they cannot be resolved, they keep receiving attention, in a loop, with the intensity amplified by the silence and by the absence of external stimuli that could redirect the processing. And here is something that is rarely said about nighttime thoughts. The emotional intensity they carry at night is not an accurate representation of the actual severity of the situations. It is a systematic distortion caused by the biochemical state of the organism at that moment. The elevated cortisol, the norepinephrine that did not decrease enough, the suppressed parasympathetic system, the interoceptive amplification of silence. All of this creates a context where the risk assessment system is operating with parameters that amplify the perception of threat. The same problem that during the day would feel manageable, at night can seem catastrophic. The same uncertainty that during the day would be tolerable, at night can feel unbearable. Not because the problem changed, because the instrument of evaluation is calibrated differently. And recognizing this, that nighttime intensity is not a reliable measure of reality, is already a way of creating distance between the processing that is happening and the interpretation you make of it. But there is something even deeper behind this pattern, something that explains not only why the mind won't stop at night, but why it keeps not stopping even when you already know all of this. Because the system is not only processing threats, it is protecting something, and understanding what it is protecting reveals a dimension of the nighttime pattern that completely transforms the relationship with it. There is a question that emerges after everything explored so far. If the system is processing unresolved threats, if it is trying to consolidate what was left incomplete, if it is following a vigilance protocol that was learned over time, what would be needed for that processing to happen differently? And the answer begins with something that may seem simple but carries deep implications. The system needs a specific condition in order to process in a restorative way. Not forced silence, not control over thoughts, not techniques that try to prevent what is happening. It needs biochemical safety, an internal state where the risk assessment parameters are calibrated in a way that allows processing to happen without creating more activation. And biochemical safety is not created by the decision to feel safe. It is built by consistent physiological patterns that the system recognizes as signals that it can reduce its vigilance. There is a process in the neuroscience of sleep called homeostatic sleep pressure. As the day progresses, a substance called adenosine accumulates in the brain. It is a byproduct of neural activity, a biochemical marker of how much work the brain has performed, and it serves as a signal to the system that rest is needed. When adenosine levels are sufficiently high, the system receives an unambiguous signal, not an instruction, a state that communicates that the waking cycle has completed and that the next period is one of recovery. But here's the detail that connects everything. Caffeine, which most people use to maintain alertness, blocks adenosine receptors. It does not reduce adenosine. It blocks the signal. The work was done. The marker is there. But the system cannot read the message, and the state of alert is maintained. This is a perfect biochemical metaphor for what happens in chronically hyperactivated systems. It is not that the signal for rest doesn't exist. It is that the system cannot receive it, cannot interpret it as sufficiently trustworthy to reduce vigilance. There is something produced by physical activity, exposure to natural daylight, and genuine social engagement that helps restore the system's sensitivity to those signals. And there is something produced by chronic sleep deprivation, prolonged stress, and inadequate recovery that reduces that sensitivity. The system is not being irrational when it cannot switch off at night. It is operating with the resources it has, with the sensitivity it developed, with the parameters that were shaped by everything it has been through. There is a concept that deepens what is possible in this context. It is called the circadian opportunity window. The nervous system has moments in the day when the transition into rest is physiologically more accessible, not because you decided to relax, but because the biological rhythm is creating the internal conditions for it. Recognizing those moments, being available for them, not forcing the state of alertness beyond them, not introducing new activation stimuli within those windows, is a way of working with the system rather than against it. Not as a technique, as a recognition of the rhythm the system itself carries. But there is something even more fundamental than this recognition, something that involves the system's relationship with its own nighttime processing. When you stop treating nighttime thoughts as intruders that need to be controlled and begin to recognize them as processing that is trying to happen, the relationship with them shifts, not the content, not the immediate intensity, the relationship. And when the relationship shifts, The system no longer needs to use conscious attention to resist what is happening. It no longer needs to create a second layer of activation, the frustration with the activation, on top of the first. And that reduction of resistance does not accelerate sleep immediately, but it reduces the energy cost of what is happening. It reduces the intensity of the experience. It creates a space where processing can happen with less interference, and gradually, with consistent patterns that communicate to the system that the night is safe. That processing can happen without the need for additional vigilance. The rhythm begins to reorganize. Slow waves deepen. REM sleep consolidates. Emotional reprocessing completes. And the mind that wouldn't stop at night, not because something was wrong with it, but because it was trying to do something important with the resources it had, begins to find the space it needed, not through force, through understanding what the system was trying to do all along. If something in this video resonated, perhaps because you recognized your own system in these words, not as a problem, as a pattern, and a pattern that has been named already has a different relationship with the one who carries it. Leave something in the comments if you'd like. A sentence, a perception, a part that arrived differently than expected. Because what you can articulate about what you feel at night already begins to change how the system processes what comes in the dark. There is still one dimension of this pattern that was not explored here. What happens to a nervous system that has spent so much time in intense nighttime processing mode that it became its default setting for silence, not only at night, in any moment of quiet? Why calm for this system learn to feel suspicious, and what that reveals about the relationship between what we feel and what we learn to expect.